We often fall into this trap of thinking that if a book is popular, it must be, well, intellectually infallible.
Right. If millions have read it, it has to be the undisputed truth.
Exactly. And today we are diving deep into a work that is celebrated for that very reason, its accessibility. We're talking about A Short History of Nearly Everything, 2.0 by Bill Bryson.
A book that masterfully invites curiosity.
It really does. But
Yeah.
it also demands a critical eye on how it conveys knowledge, not just what it conveys.
And that's our mission here. We believe that some books, especially those that shape public scientific understanding, absolutely must be challenged.
So what's the framework for this critique?
We're using a step-by-step critical thinking framework that maps claims to evidence. Then we apply an intellectual framework, largely from Mortimer J. Adler's work, to sort facts from theories.
Okay, so claims, evidence, and sorting.
And then we use the golden rule in the U.S. preamble to find any ethical or civic asymmetries. We'll wrap it all up with a logical analysis and a balanced conclusion.
And just a quick note before we get into the science of it all. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for a deeper, more dynamic book critique.
So, the book itself.
Right. Bill Bryson. He's famously a travel writer, not a scientist, which is what makes this so compelling. His goal is basically to explain everything from the Big Bang on, but in a way anyone can get.
Prioritizing humor and story over, let's say, technical precision.
Exactly.
And that background is so critical to understanding both the book's genius and its limitations. His stated goal is to show what we know and how we know it.
But the real power, I think, is in the implicit thesis.
Yes.
It's that feeling of awe, that sense of staggering improbability, the idea that our very existence is so fragile, so contingent. It's basically a cosmic miracle.
Precisely. And that implied message that we need to approach our planet with humility and care is deeply humane. But if you're looking for a mature map of scientific methodology,
Of how we really know what we know.
it falls a bit short. It's a brilliant gateway, but it mixes that deep illumination with some real gaps in transparency, especially around the evidence.
Okay, let's start with its strength, because the narrative is why people love this book. Bryson is a master at communicating.
He is. He takes these huge, mind-bending claims and makes them instantly relatable.
Like the cosmic scale, the Big Bang.
He nails those core informational claims. For instance, the whole universe starting from a state so small and dense you can't even imagine it. And he hammers home that idea of contingency.
But if gravity was just a tiny bit stronger or the expansion a bit different?
No atoms would have formed. No life, nothing.
And he does the same thing with the story of life itself. That 4 billion-year journey from microbes wasn't some inevitable march toward us.
Not at all. He presents it as a long series of almost comical accidents and lucky breaks.
And that success comes down to his style, how he presents the evidence.
He doesn't just give you dry data. He takes established science, like plate tectonics or the age of the Earth, and frames it with these vivid metaphors.
I remember the one about continents moving about as fast as your fingernails grow.
Exactly that. It sticks with you, and he humanizes it all.
He does. All these biographical stories of the scientists.
The eccentric personalities, the rivalries, the pure chance discoveries. It makes science feel messy and human, which is great for drawing you in.
Plus the thought experiments, like flying back in time 1 year per second to show how old the Earth is. It's brilliant.
It's powerful narrative history, no question. But this is also where the critical challenge comes in. That same style becomes a structural weakness.
A weakness when you look at the how we know part.
Precisely. He tells you what scientists concluded, but not always how they built their case.
The methodology gets left behind.
It's often abbreviated or even omitted, especially in really complex fields like quantum mechanics or cosmology. To really get how we know what stars are made of, or how we ruled out competing theories of dark matter.
You need the experimental design, the logic.
Yes, and Bryson often gives us the accepted conclusion and just moves on to keep the story flowing.
That's a huge point. A scientist might say the universe is 5% visible matter, but the real intellectual work is in the pages and pages of math and measurements that got them there.
And Bryson sacrifices those pages for pacing. You see it clearly when he touches on controversies.
Like abiogenesis, how life started from non-life.
A hugely contested topic. Or the fine-tuning argument that the universe's constants seem perfectly set for life. In his hands, these complex debates get simplified.
They become part of that single narrative of we almost shouldn't be here.
Right. It prioritizes the feeling of awe over the technical rigor of the analysis.
So the book gives us a ton of information, facts, dates, names, But information isn't the same as understanding.
Or intellectual rigor.
And that brings us right to the intellectual framework we need to apply.
Right, we're using Mortimer Adler's distinctions here. Essentially, we're trying to sort what Bryson presents as settled science from what's really just a fascinating but still speculative hypothesis.
Okay, let's start with the solid round. What in the book rises to the level of settled knowledge?
Things with overwhelming empirical support that cohere with other fields. The old Earth timeline, the basics of evolution, plate tectonics, the broad strokes of cosmic expansion.
The foundations.
These are settled knowledge. They score very well on Adler's tests for correspondence to reality and coherence with other sciences. The geological and biological history in the book is structurally very sound.
So the history of our planet is solid. But what about when he looks further out? Where does the line between fact and speculation start to blur?
It happens when he gets into deep theoretical physics and cosmology. Things like superstring theory, certain multiverse ideas, or the exact path from chemistry to life.
Those are all inherently speculative.
They're working hypotheses, opinions, they are not settled knowledge.
And the narrative style is the problem again, isn't it? He uses that same charming, confident voice to describe dinosaurs as he does to describe 11-dimensional space.
Exactly. The narrative rhythm can be dangerous there. A reader gets swept up and might not realize the level of confidence for plate tectonics is worlds apart from the confidence for superstring theory.
Analytically, you'd want a big red flag next to those speculative ideas.
Instead, they're given almost the same narrative weight. That unimaginable improbability he uses so well, it works to create wonder, which is great.
But it's not a rigorous analytical distinction.
Not at all. It's a rhetorical tool and a powerful one, but those ideas belong in the category of tentative hypothesis.
Now let's move beyond just facts and theories.
Yeah.
Where does the book succeed in providing true understanding? Showing the connections.
It does that very well, actually. It masterfully shows the interdependence of it all. Cosmology, geology, biology, how the start of the universe set the stage for Earth, and how a stable Earth allowed life to evolve.
That systemic link is a genuine form of understanding.
It is, but that how we know dimension, the pure logic of scientific reasoning, it's still episodic. We get anecdotes instead of a clear, consistent model of the scientific method.
And as we move into the more complex, systematic critique of this material, just a reminder that this analysis is part of something larger. We use Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, critiques, and podcasts, all inspiring reflection and rational thought.
Now let's bring in our final critical layer. We're shifting the lens from knowledge to ethics and civic duty.
Using the Golden Rule and the U.S. Preamble.
Right. And the book's final sections on human-caused extinctions and biodiversity loss definitely move toward practical wisdom. They link scientific understanding to a sense of responsibility.
So let's apply the Golden Rule, the reciprocity test. If we were born anywhere, anytime, any gender, would we accept this telling of the story of science?
That's the question. And the book's narrative largely follows Western, mostly male scientists, often portrayed as these eccentric geniuses working alone.
Women and non-Western traditions are kind of the exception.
They appear as notable exceptions, not as constant co-equal voices in this global enterprise of discovery.
Now, someone might argue, well, that's just history. That's who was getting published and funded back then.
And that's a common argument. But the reciprocity test asks us to dig deeper. The issue isn't malice on Bryson's part. It's that by only telling that story, the book can accidentally reinforce the idea that science is for a very narrow demographic.
The historical context of exclusion,
Who is prevented from participating is completely absent. And that oversight means the distribution of recognition is heavily skewed. It fails the test.
that makes sense. It's about seeing the unexamined asymmetries. Okay, what about the U.S. preamble criteria? Not as a political text, but as a lens for civic responsibility.
Yes. By highlighting environmental risks, Bryson's work implicitly aligns with promoting the general welfare and securing liberty for our posterity. He primes you to feel that environmental stewardship is vital for the future.
That link is strong. But the preamble also mentions establishing justice. Does the book touch on justice within science?
Not really. It stops short of discussing distributive justice. Who gets access to science education? Who is excluded from institutions? How did colonialism shape discovery and exploitation?
So, ethically, the book is more about priming an attitude.
Exactly. Awe, modesty, concern. It's less about a structured argument on the rights and duties needed to protect the planet equitably.
Let's move to the logical structure then. Beyond the narrative choices, are there any logical issues a critical reader should look out for?
There's a minor but persistent one, an occasional slide into what's called an argument from ignorance.
What does that look like in the book?
It's when Bryson subtly moves from, we don't know much about this specific thing, to a grand rhetorical conclusion about the universe's mystery or how improbable we are.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, a statement might go something like this. We still have no definitive explanation for how the first self-replicating molecules formed, which just shows how unlikely life is.
I see. The logical leap.
It's a subtle one. A lack of knowledge about how doesn't logically prove extreme unlikeliness. It just proves we have a knowledge gap. It's a rhetorical move that serves the narrative, not a rigorous logical step.
A perfect example of sacrificing nuance for story. What about the focus on those eccentric personalities?
That can invite a hasty generalization. You might finish the book thinking all great science is done by these isolated, brilliant, slightly odd figures.
Instead of recognizing it as a huge, collaborative, peer-reviewed process.
Right, and the structure of the book itself, the flow. Reviewers often mention how choppy it is. You're jumping from cosmology to 17th century geology and back again.
It can make it hard to follow the underlying argument of how we know.
Which is exactly why this book is perfect raw material for critical thinking. Its strengths, the hooks, the wonder, the human stories are undeniable.
But its limitations let us model what rational reading looks like. We can invite you, the listener, to pause and sort the claims into fact versus theory.
And to ask those crucial ethical questions about responsibility and inclusion.
So we can use his material to generate some really sharp questions, like, from facts to responsibility. How does knowing about planetary fragility become a question of justice for future generations?
Well, we can use his gallery of scientists to ask, who gets to be a scientist? We can examine that cast of characters to see structural exclusion and imagine what a more globally just scientific enterprise could look like.
And finally, building on his main theme, we can ask, we know so little, so what?
Exploring those two different responses. The nihilistic one that says, we are nothing, so nothing matters, versus the responsibility-based one.
The one that says, because life and consciousness are so rare, they demand our utmost care.
Exactly. So our balanced verdict is this. As a popular science narrative, the book is genuinely enlarging and humane. It's a wonderful starting point. But as a text for critical thinking, it really needs to be paired with an explicit framework, like the one we use today, to move readers beyond just wow toward a real understanding of how claims are justified and whose voices might be missing.
This comprehensive analysis was conducted using a rigorous methodology that systematically maps core claims to evidence, applies an intellectual framework for epistemic classification, and incorporates ethical principles for identifying systemic omissions and evaluating civic relevance.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nurse your mind on the go.